Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BT's Fly Tying Friday. Tonight, the 25th of April, Davy Wotton will be at the Vise, sharing some of his patterns. We may or may not be having a weekly tip, and we will not be doing sharing tonight. We've got a full program as it is, but we will have Evelyn doing her artwork. Formerly from Wales in the UK, Flippin, Arkansas's Davy Wotton started his fly tying adventure in the 1960s. He soon branched out to mail order flies, high grade materials, and commission flies for a London fly shop. In the 80s, he developed a synthetic seal fur dubbing he named SLF. That was short for synthetic living fibers. Davy manufactured it as a signature series for names like David Whitlock, Paul Jorgensen, Oliver Edwards, and sold many colors worldwide, including Hare's Ear, Squirrel, Mickey, Masterclass, Finesse, Seal, etc. The list is too long to share all of them. He eventually sold the brand to Wapsie Fly, a distribution company in Mountain Home, Arkansas. He has taught and demonstrated fly tying all across the world and is a signature fly tyer for Foley Mill and Solitude, who produced many of his patterns. As a representative of his home country, Wales, he has received awards for tying, casting, and competitive fly fishing events. Those awards include the USFW for his conservation work, the Salmon and Trout Association, the National Anglers Council, and the President's Award from NAFF. He became a regular contributor, offering new tying techniques to a monthly fly tying magazine in the UK, and also sold articles to American Angler and Fly Tyer here in the US. If that isn't enough, Davy has been an ambassador for numerous fly fishing businesses, including technical director for the Partridge Hook Company before its sale to Mustad. Today, Davy operates a guide service on the Arkansas White River system. He also likes to focus on historical flies from the early 1700s to the early 1900s. He ties every type of fly from the simplest to the most complex classic Atlantic salmon flies. Tonight, join us in welcoming the 2020 inductee to the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame, Davy Wotton. Davy, the vice is all yours.
Thanks, Al. It's great to be here. Um, and thank you for what you've been talking about, what I've done in the past. Uh, let me just say this, in the early days when I learned to tie flies, it was a very different thing to what we know today. I mean, it's just kind of unreal with the availability of different materials, this, that, and the other. Social media, of course, has made more knowledge to people about techniques and tying flies and different variations of patterns and this, that, and the other. But you did point out that I still have an allegiance, I would say, toward the historic flies, and the reason I do that is because my country of origin, it goes back 200-300 years of fly fishing history in that respect. And so I still like to maintain the traditions of those flies, which essentially whatever they are, North Country soft hackle spiders, the evolution of dry flies really in the mid 1800s to the early 1920s, this, that, and the other. And to be honest about it, in many cases, a lot of those flies are not that easy to tie, particularly, flies like double split wing dry flies and stuff like that. And which is what I used to have to do back in those early days, because as we know today, the use of synthetics really didn't have a use in flies at that particular point of time. And I used to tie hundreds of those damn things and kind of do it without even thinking about it. So I'd still like to maintain the traditions and the techniques and the skills of tying those flies, of course. And as far as that, as you well know, I also like to tie stuff that's pretty damn complicated just for the hell of it. It's like, I like tying stuff like fish, they take like about 2 hours to make one of these fancy little stone flies. Or, I like still to tie many of the classic Atlantic salmon flies. And to me, that's all just part of what fly tying is all about. You develop, different skills that enable you to do that. And here, tie like these lifelike patterns as well, like stonefly nymphs and stuff like that. It's a little different from tying something like a simple whatever, zebra midge, because there's a lot more to it with flies like this, albeit, they require different techniques and time. And so really it's a learning process, I guess, more than anything else. So yeah, I mean, I've been there, done it, so to speak. I have an allegiance more so to the use of natural materials. I'm not saying I don't use synthetics, but I still have the way of thought that's natural materials. I may be wrong when I say that, but I can only base that on thousands of hours of fishing, catching fish, and seeing thousands of fish caught doing guide days. I just, the way I see how a perception or a fish perceives a fly, let's put it to you like that. And so the three flies that we're going to do this evening are fly patterns that I innovated from 25 to 30 years ago, and they have been featured in fly fishing magazines in both the United Kingdom and the USA. They're not technically really that difficult. I think that in many cases, the proportionate value of a fly is important. In other words, how you construct it and how it is perceived and looks to a fish. That to me is what it's more all about. Everybody say, well, you could tie the most awful looking creation on a piece of metal, i.e. the hook. Oh yeah, sometime or other it'll catch a fish. Well, sure it will. But over a period of time, how long does it take for it to be an efficient or effective fly? Well, probably zero. So my view about that is that good flies are flies that have a consistency under the prevailing conditions and the techniques that you use to fish those flies to catch fish on a consistent basis and not chuck and chance it flies. That's the way to explain it to. And I think also, um, most certainly today, there are some really, really good fly ties out there today compared to years ago. And they may not, well, let's just put it like this. They may have been so, but you didn't know that because they now have the means to show what they were doing as we do today, which I guess is a good thing in many respects. But nevertheless, all I'm going to say further on that is that my own personal view about good fish catching flies are generally flies that are not that technically difficult to tie, because I've never found that that makes a difference anyway, to be honest about it. But they are flies that do their construction, the materials used most certainly have a visible appeal to fish, like I said, under the prevailing conditions at the time. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to tie three of my caddis fly patterns that I can assure you will catch you an awful lot of fish. Most of these free flies I'm going to demonstrate, you can change to some extent. What I mean by that is the color of the fly. So if you want to use an olive body as opposed to a tan body and you want to change the wing structures, different colors, you can do that. So there's variables in this fly. They don't have to be exactly as we dictate the materials of use there. Another thing which I'm going to show you along the way is this, is that, when I first start tying flies, I had to use Pearsall's thread. And some of you guys watching have probably also used it, but you learn in a hurry when you use Pearsall's thread that you use minimum amount of thread turns to produce the fly. You can't get away with wrapping 6, 7, or 8, 9 wraps of thread. You have to minimize that. And that's always been something that's stayed with me for the rest of my life, regardless of the modern threads that we have today. So that said, overall, I tend to use threads that are what we consider to be about a 6/0, thereabouts, something like that. There are some use, I grant you, for extreme fine threads like GSPs and stuff like that. I got fors and against the use of some of that stuff, to be honest about it. But pretty much most of the flies I tie, regardless, I generally do with a 6/0 thread. And so I generally use either Danville's or Wapsi UTC. They're pretty good threads. I've used pretty much every thread you can think of, but I just have a favor for certain threads because they suit what I do, and I just like how they work with what I do. So okay, so what we're going to do is this. I'm going to show you some different techniques along the way as we do what we do. And some of it you've probably not seen before, but there you go. So nevertheless, we're just going to initially start that thread on that hook shank like that. And this fly, you know yourself out because you tied flies commercially, that there's ways that we can I'm not saying necessarily create a shortcut, but we can do things a lot more efficiently and easier as opposed to, unnecessary wraps of thread. So this is going to have initially a part of a dub body. So I don't find no need to actually wind that thread back to the bend of that hook to initially set in this ribbon medium. I'm going to start there, somewhere about midways to the shank of the hook. We take my thread a little ways back towards bend, which is where I'm going to add my dubbing material. And I don't start at the bend of the hook because, as you know, generally we're going to have a little small amount of bed thread before we get back to the point where we actually start to bring that dubbing forward. I don't generally use wax that often. Certain flies that require that I do, and mostly that's North Country flies where we have to put maybe a little dusting of mold or something like that. But generally I don't. Another thing is, when I learned to tie flies, I always did my dubbing with my left hand. And I know most people do it with the right. And one of my friends used to say, oh, that's the wrong way to do it. And I said, well, how's that? How do you know what's right or what's wrong? The end result is what matters, right? Because to be honest about it, I could dub on a piece of wire with wire wool. It's all about maintaining tension in that thread and what you do with that material, depending on what it is, because they do vary. Soft microfibers like hair for is one thing, and spiky fibers is another, and synthetics is another. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're just very gently going to compress that around that thread. And bear in mind, we got a little bare section there, and we're going to bring that back like that until that dubbing initially starts to catch. And then from that point onwards, we're just going to rotate at the bottom like this. And so the amount of rotation that I create would determine how that dubbing is effective on that rope. So essentially, we're calling a rope of dubbing. My friend Oliver Edge used to call it a noodle. So yeah, okay, whatever. So we've got that. We're just going to come back to that point where we initiate the dubbing to start, and we're going to build that forward. And you made a point last week, which was this, was that, just because we've come forward, it doesn't mean to say we can't go back and, so to speak, build up our body proportionate values by doing so. And I absolutely agree with that. It's not just a question of keep moving in a forward direction. So really, we're just going to finish this off till we get roughly about there, which is about 3/5 the shank of the hook. Okay. And I want a nice spiky effect there. We're then going to reverse wrap that with some ostrich oil. And I use ostrich oil a lot, particularly certain fly bodies, and particularly more so for caddis fly bodies. And we're just going to catch that on a couple of turns. That's it. Now, let me show you something I do, and I don't know whether the camera is going to easily show this to you. I know that most people, what they'll actually do when they start to wind this, they'll work in between the vise jaw and the thread to keep pulling around, and I don't do that. So what I do is this: I balance my bobbin on my little finger. Okay, so I've got this balanced on my little finger. All right, right there. Now I have so much easy workable area to work with. So as I come forward, essentially I'm just bringing that through. And I keep the same distance between those fingers and that thread. It's not as if I'm trying to work within a small margin of space to do that. And we get back to the tail end of the fly. We're going to hold that up. We're going to bring that ribbon medium up. We're going to transfer our hands. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put that bobbin on my little finger. And you see, I can work all this distance away.
Yeah.
I'm not cramping myself trying to work in between that thread and that hook and this.
So you're just holding the thread out of the way with your little finger.
Yeah. Now, next thing, wire, copper wire. Pretty much once you wound it, you can pretty much let it go. It's not going to spring or undo itself, because I know, watching people that come to my classes, they're going to pick this up, they're going to take this bobbin over 3 or 4 times over the top. You don't really need to do that. Wire will stay where you last finished the wind on it. Then pretty much all you've got to do is just bring the thread up behind it. That's secure. Then we can bust off that, and we're going to cut off the excess that we had there with the ostrich oil. And they got this other terminology that they call today. Oh, we're going to helicopter the wire off. Where did that come from? Right? I don't really mess around with that. I just use the backside of my scissors and we get rid of that. Okay. So we're going to form a wing structure over the top of this. And I initially did this when I developed this fly pattern, which is back in the 90s, with Swiss straw or raffine. It's pretty much the same thing. But then another product came on the market called Medallion Sheeting, which was produced, or I'm not sure whether he actually knew, I'm pretty sure he did, by a person by the name of Shane Stalker. I don't know, do you remember him at all, Al?
Yes, I knew him well, and he is the one that brought it on the market. Yes.
Yeah,
Butterfly, is it a butterfly?
he was a fly tie from Colorado, and unfortunately, we lost him, in his early days of his life, unfortunately. But nevertheless, you can't really get that today, as far as I'm aware of. Maybe some still around. And if you can, perfect. If not, you're just going to use Swiss straw or raffine. It's the same thing. But the principle of tying it in is the same. And these are the two materials. In fact, medallion sheeting is a lamination of Swiss straw. That's what it is. And you can create that yourself. What you need to do is actually take regular Swiss straw, spread that out, tape that above and below, and you're going to use, I use a product called Speed Coat. It's what we use for rod wrappings when we do fancy wrappings on rods, and it seals that so they don't bleed when you put other varnishes on top. But essentially, you can do it with Swiss straw. And that said, we just do it this way. So what we're going to do, we're just going to cut a section out. And this is the size 12 hook, incidentally, which is roughly about, a little over 1/4 of an inch, thereabouts. Take that out. And you can do this one of two ways. You can either cut it prior to tying it in, or you can do it thereafter. But what we're going to do is we're just going to cut two little angles off, one there, one there. And we're going to cut it in the middle, like that, or somewhere close to it. So you've actually created
Two
little separations that way. Can you see that?
No.
Okay.
Yes, we sure can.
Yeah, like that. There you go. Now we're going to set that directly on top so that the end of the material is roughly about to the bend of the hook, or just slightly past it. But it's important that you get that central. And so you may have to just turn the vise back towards you. And we're going to push that down. And we're going to lift that up. Okay. There. And then we're going to take the thread over 1, 2 turns. And we're going to make sure that that material is set the way we want it. In other words, I want equal both left and right side. If it's not, just bring that back up and set it down again till you get it the way you want it. Okay, that's where we want it, pretty much. So really what you're doing is, with this process, is actually you're mimicking some emerging wings on the fly, because this is a pattern that's representing the caddis fly in the meniscus. It's in the surface film, but it's not quite emerged out as a winged insect ready to take off. So we've got that. Another thing I might mention, and I know I can see that, is I like very long spigots on my bobbins for lots of different reasons. Another thing that, we talked about some time ago is adding weight to the bobbin. And I think I mentioned to you, Al, that I do that. I actually put shot in the thread spool. So in between there, this lead shot, BBs, usually about 4 or 5 of them, because I like the weight in the bobbin. It gives a little more balance to that. And more to the point, a lot of the techniques I use, I like the longer spigot because it's much, much easier to control and spin that bobbin with that long spigot. Okay. So there's a few little tips there. Okay. So we're going to bring this back and fold it back and just take a couple of tight wraps in that position to secure that. All right. And then we're going to cut that from there. Then we're going to tie a little underwing. CDC, you know, is quite a popular material today. The deal with it is finding really good quality CDC, and that's not quite so easy. That said, I've always liked to use these little puffs, what they call CDC puffs. You know, they're quite dense in their fiber, and I find them absolutely perfect for a lot of the fly pans that I've developed, as opposed to the longer fibers. So all we're going to do is we're going to set this on top of the, right there. Another thing I should mention is that for all the fingers on my hand, I can use my little finger, my third,
Not in the
and
camera.
my first, all in the same manner. In other words, I can hold my materials, this one, this one, this one, this one. Because I always thought if I ever had lost my index finger, which is the finger that most people tend to use when they're holding material, I got a problem. But I was also a bluegrass banjo picker too, so I got a lot of dexterity in my hand, so that helps something too. But nevertheless, let's just set that on the top and make sure that we get that central as the underwing. I'm going to add a hackle to that now. The original flies I used, and I'm still going to use that this evening, is what you guys call Hungarian partridge, or in the UK it's English grey partridge. It's the same bird, Perdix perdix. And we're going to use a nice brown hackle for it. Here's another little tip for you. I know that the majority of guys, when they use this feather, they'll literally strip all this fiber off. And I'll tell you a little tip to not to do that, and that's really this, is just draw these fibers back just a small amount. And it's the reason why I tell you to do that,
Camera.
is because if you leave this, you have a much better ability to hold that either with your fingers or with your hackle pliers when you wind that hackle. You know, you're just not relying on the actual stem of the hackle. So, but the principle of tying it in is essentially the same. There's two ways you can tie in a partridge hackle, or any soft hackle for that matter. It's either by the tip or the stem. And largely that does depend on the fly and whether you choose to do that, because there is a right and wrong way based on the fly pattern in question that you're actually doing that to. So we're going to pull that back and create us the typical V. And then another thing I always impress upon people is this, you know, there's no point whatsoever in tying in that hackle that way. Why? Because you can't tie in this excess material that's past the eye of the hook. You may as well be rid of it before you even start. So we're going to bring that back. We got probably 2 or 3 meters there at the most. We're just going to cut that off and make sure that the distance from where the tying in point is to behind the back of the eye. And that doesn't exceed that. Catch that in like that. Then we're going to take 1 tight turn, 2 tight turns, 3 tight turns. Okay, now remember I said to you, if you hold this or you keep this upper part of the stem like that, it's so much easier to hold that. And personally, I prefer to wind hackles with my hands if I can do that. If they're micro small, you know, obviously I can't do that. But I think you have much more control over the degree of tension and twist during that process of that wind when you do that. Now, we're going to just draw these fibers back. And this is the way I do it. I take that hackle round 1 full turn and I trap it with my finger like that. I do exactly the same thing again. It's just really a repetitive process. Back up, round again. And we get to the bare stem now, as you can see. So as we come round to that point, this is what I do. I'm doing things slowly because normally I do this really fast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this thread up and I'm going to take it over to the left. Then I'm going to rotate that bobbin back toward me. Could you see what I was doing there? I'll show you again. So we're going to hold the hackle stem up we're going to take the thread up to the left. Then I rotate my bobbin back round while it's maintaining the tension to that hackle, like that. See that? Then I come back round. And then it's secured. As opposed to trying to take the bobbin over and drop it over, drop it over. I maintain tension throughout the entire process of winding that hackle. And once you get the knack of doing it, you can do it pretty fast. And we're going to cut off the excess. Now it's your choice to do this, whether one way or the other. We're going to add some legs to the fly, pheasant tails. For some people, you know, I don't know, there's different ways that you can actually put pheasant tail together. And in my opinion, to get the legs the way I want them, I choose to do it with little hackle pliers, excuse me, tweezers like this, because I can create the circle with the feather. Let me just show you something here. We do it with this. As an example, we'll use this ostrich shell. So what I do is I basically just rotate that in my finger like that, and I use this. And by doing that, can you see? Okay. I can literally set the turnover of where I want that knot to be by the position that I pull that through. And I'll do the same thing again. Okay, so let me show you again on the pheasant tail. Another thing about that, the longer the fibers of the pheasant tail you have, the better, because it's easier to work with. So it takes a little bit of manipulation. I know there's various other ways people choose to want to do it, but when you're trying to knot single strands of pheasant tail, I can tell you that to get them the way you want, and you monitor that. That's the best way to do it. Put that through, grab the tip, pull that back through, and create a knot. All right, so I already prepped some of these, so I'm going to tie one into the left, one into the right. And there's a neat way to do this. It's not a question of like tying one to the left side first and one to the right. You're going to do it this way. You're going to take the two strands of pheasant tail, and you've got pretty much what we call the crossover, the knots in about the same position, like that. Okay.
Down.
And then we're going to tie those in forward. 1, 2 turns. Then we're going to take one to the left, and we're going to take one to the right. We can cut off the stems that we don't need. Come here. So. That. Okay, we've got one to the left, one to the right. I'm going to bring that back, take our thread forward. It doesn't really matter, you know, the degree of angle they are, because once this fly has been moved in the water, those legs are naturally going to reverse back forward, excuse me, to the bend of the hook anyway, and that's okay. All right. Next thing, you're going to tie some horns in, and that's kind of like an optional thing. And you're going to do that with bronze mallard. Well, actually, I might put just a little touch more dub in there at the head of the fly. What I did, I took out 2 strands of bronze mallard. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use my thumb to crimp them. And see how I made these little turns in there, like that, like 2 little horns. Actually would represent the antenna. That's what they're doing. And we're going to catch those in. So they, at this point of time, just face forward, like that. Did it with my thumb.
With the thumb, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to make sure that they're kind of central. Right. And then we're going to bring one down to the left and one over to the right. And you see, if you get them right, you see they kind of hook around the fly body like that. See that? There you go.
Mm.
All right. And then we're just going to build up a nice, neat head. Just cut off the excess of those horns. That's good. Another little thing that I always do, you know, when I finish my flies for the whip finish, it's so easy and it avoids a lot of messing around, getting varnish in the eye, the hook, and God knows what else. I always just varnish the thread like that. If you put too much on there, just flick a bobbin and you'll get the excess off. But pretty much, that's how I do it. And this here is the traditional English whip finish tool. And I've used this one probably 40 years old. Unfortunately, there's some copies of these things from Asian sources, and they're worthless because the relationship of the bend here is wrong, and your thread will jump out. So this is the vineyard one, is the best, and I find it extremely fast to work with. All right, so, and then we're done. Another thing you mentioned last week about, you know, how you tension up after you made the final whip finish. I do that with my scissors. I just push that there and we're done. So anyway, that's your first fly.
That is a beautiful, beautiful fly. I love that.
Yeah, it's a killer caddis pattern, I can assure you, because there's all the elements of life in that fly to the fish's perception. And like I said, you put those, see the little horns on the back? Yeah, one to the left, one. My friend used to call it a ram's horn caddis because he liked the way I made those horns on that. And so I said, that's fine, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. You catch fish, right? So that's number one. Any questions regarding that?
Yeah, Davey, this is Jerry Chris. How do you present that fly in the, you know, on whatever the seam is or whatever? How do you present it? Does it sink or do you put anything on the
Oh, no,
leader?
no. Okay. The answer to your question is this. I typically use that fly in conjunction with one of the other flies that I'm going to tie, which is the third.
Okay.
But that said, so what typically you would be doing, you'd be fishing some kind of a pupa imitation about a 2 to 3 feet below that fly, which is on what we can define as the top drop fly. Okay, and so when you work those flies through the surface film, this fly is bulge in the film. That's objectively what it is. You can also use that as a single fly too on a longer leader system. And as far as most of what I do, I tend to fish what we call more the traditional wet fly techniques, because essentially that's really what that is. It's kind of like a modern variation of a winged traditional wet fly. And I fish that in conjunction with 2 other flies that are below it. So the 2 flies that are below act as resistance and an anchor effect to allow you to fish that fly, which is going to be on a detached dropper anywhere between 6 to 12 inches. And that enables you to keep that working through the surface film and boom, up the fish will come and kill it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Davey, the thread that you used on my computer appears to be yellow. Is that what it is?
It's an olive. It's a light olive.
Olive. Okay.
Yeah. I don't think that, you know, unless the thread is actually a part of the visible aspect of a fly, I don't think it makes much difference. You know, typically flies all at one time are pretty much just tied with black thread. Okay. So my view about that is, you know, okay, so if the thread is part of the visible aspect of that fly, yeah, you may need to use an appropriate thread cutter for that reason. Or if not, I don't think it makes any difference. Let's put it in perspective. Do you think that small amount of thread at the head of the fly going to make a difference to the fish based on the rest of what's behind it?
No, and I agree with you. So, and then finally, the horns that you made, was that out of mallard barbs?
Yeah.
Out of mallard? Okay. I don't
Yeah.
think it's on your ingredients, your recipe.
Bronze mallard.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, maybe we've got it. There's a little, you know, bits and pieces that you can add there by choice or otherwise. It's up to you, you know what I'm saying? But so with caddis flies, I've always had a thing about horns or antennae, so to speak. And the reason being is because a lot of the old traditional flies actually used tails that were made from, it was kind of weird, you know, if you take a fly like what a classic fly called a woodcock and hare's ear, they actually tied strands of mallard for the tail to represent the horns. So it's actually they were did in reverse instead of them being tied over the front, so to speak, like you would a dry tail, it was tied in the back. Do I think it makes much difference? I don't know the answer to that. I just think that aesthetically the fly looks a bit better when it has those to it, you know. So this one goes back to about the mid-90s, and it was in a fly tie here as well as that. But so this pattern really, I wanted a fly that, based on the means or methods that it was fish, would create a visible disturbance to the surface, but imitate really my caddis fly. And if you've ever watched caddis flies skating on the surface, pretty much you see a V shape. And the reason you see that is because the lower trailing edges of the wings of that caddis fly is what creates that movement on the surface. And so this is the fly pattern that I had developed to do that. I can only tell you this, you know, when you've tied thousands of flies, you can pretty much look at a feather and you know exactly what that feather will do before you even put it on that hook. And so this is the brown hackles from a Hungarian partridge, and they vary in size. You've got the small ones here. So I always look for the quality of the feather. That's the first thing. And it's, you know, not moth beaten or anything like that. But I also want a feather that pretty much from the center is equal. Oh, hang on, let me get this out. So it's kind of like that. It's the same left side and right side. And that gives you a good proportionate wind in that hackle, equal when you wind that around the shank of the hook. Now, sometimes you might want a very sparse hackle, which we do for a lot of the soft hackles. And so you just strip one fiber off like that, or one side, shall you say, and you just essentially, you're just going to use that amount there. So the answer to your question really is this, you know, based on the pattern that you're tying, what you want as far as the density of the hackle, you want a sparse wind, you want a more heavy wind. And really with partridge, you know, for the size of the feather, you can't really get a seriously dense wind of fiber with that feather. Maybe 3 or 4 turns, generally at the most, something like that. So yeah, you know, it's like I said, you know, your experience of tying over the years, you just kind of look at a feather and you know what it will do before you even get it to the shank of the hook. And I think that's something that for a lot of people that are, you know, new into tying and what, it takes a while for them to kind of get to understand that. You can explain that to somebody, well, that's the ideal feather. Well, you know, it takes practice and time to get to know that. All right, so this particular fly, what you choose to use for your body medium, that's up to you. You can use natural hair fibers, for example, natural hair, for example, tied in different shades. You can use squirrel, and squirrel is one of my favorite materials to use as a dubbing medium. It's really nice and spiky, and I produced a whole series of squirrel dubbings with the SLF, and it's got a really nice medium to it. You know, and I mixed into this a little small amount of synthetic material, so it's just got a little more kick of life. So this stuff actually goes back probably 30 years old, I would think, something like that. Okay, so once again, and I know it's been said on the show many, many times that, you know, when you select dubbing material, you must do so in a manner where you extrude the fibers more into a lengthwise direction and not just a clump. And if you do that, they will surround that thread, which essentially is your medium to allow you to essentially create the body to the fly, i.e., you'll find it so much easier to do that. Okay, so pick the thread up, and we're just going to briefly attach. So I use a fairly small amount of pressure, not that much, and it's just a rotation in the same direction. That's it. Like I said, you know, I don't use wax that much, but I also know that But the way I do what I do, it'll do what I want it to do. If that's the way to explain it. So we just get that loosely attached like that. And the thing is to get a nice clean distribution with no lumps or bumps. That's it. If you don't start that way, you're in trouble. It's that simple. And we got a little bit of bare thread there. And the reason that's there is because obviously when we get back to the bend of the hook where we start to cause that dubbing to attach, then we continue that twist. And I don't want really a tight body, but I want some effect to it. In other words, proportionate value of the profile. Let's put it like that. So we just set that back. And I use my finger a lot, you know, in the way that I create dubbings or dub bodies, because I can stack that material back like this as I go forward. See that? And I think that's very, very important. So we've got that there. So we've got a nice kind of little spiky effect. You know, tight bodied flies, yeah, of course, they have certain uses depending on the flies, but mostly for subsurface nymphy type flat patterns, emerger patterns of this kind, where the Caddis is concerned, I like to have some effect in that body. And once again, the technique here, I lay that on my little finger, the bobbin, see that? It's here. And that gives me all this margin to work with. Way back here. And once you get used to the effect of doing it, I can tell you can do it really, really fast. And then we're done. Right? With that. One thing is, you well know, Al, that when you time flies commercially, speed and efficiency is the important thing. You can't spend half an hour time one little flight. You've got to crank them out one after the other. Okay, so initially when I produced this fly, I used Swiss straw for the medium to separate the wings. And the downside of Swiss straw is that it doesn't have a lot of natural strength to it. When it actually gets wet, it kind of swells and it can tear up. The other thing was back in the days when I innovated this fly, we'd have no such thing as UV glues and all that kind of carry on. Pretty much mostly what we used at the time was just regular cellular varnish, or what you know as Sally Hansen's or something like that. And that's still pretty good, don't get me wrong. But UV, so to speak, is most useful in many cases because it adds a lot more strength to your fly one way or the other, depending on what you're doing. Either way. So what I'm going to use for this is actually polypropylene, okay? And for a couple of different reasons. One is it's strong. It has one thing. It's got a little buoyancy factor to it, but I like the finer diameter of it because you don't want a thick amount of material to separate these wings, and you'll understand why. So we're just going to catch that in on the top like that. I think that, there we go. All right. Make sure that everything's central. It's very important that you do that for this fly and that you have this absolutely 100% secure because you're going to bring this back over under some degree of tension. And if you don't have it secure, it'll pull out. And that would disrupt everything else that you're thereafter going to do. So we're going to just cut off those pieces like that. Okay. The deer hair that I use for this fly is roe deer, an indigenous deer found in Europe. And I don't know, there's a couple of places that you can get it here that I know, but roe deer is a really beautiful soft hair compared to a lot of whitetail hair. It's really, really soft. It flares very well. And in fact, when I gave a bunch of this to my friend, sadly now gone, Dave Whitlock, he fell in love with this stuff. And he said, I want more of that. I said, well, I'll tell you what. At the time, I was still back and forth to the UK. So I said, I'll make sure of that. So we got a killed deer and he ended up with the whole hide of this. But he really liked this roe deer hair. It's beautiful stuff. It really is. And I particularly liked it for this particular fly because of the way I could flare it. You can use elk and you can use whitetail, but you don't really want stiff hair. like you would use, say, for example, an outcare caddis or something like that. You want something that's a little more softer for the reason. And also, in the past few weeks, we've talked about the use of hair to create spent wings on flies. And as I sent you out some of the ephemeral danica mayfly patterns that I developed way years ago, that's what I would use. I would use this hair to splay that to make that spent wing on those mayfly patterns. Nevertheless, let's get some of this out. So, everybody talks about, taking like, about the width of a pencil and amount of hair, right? So I think it's always better to take more than you need to start with, because you're going to thin it down by the virtue of the fact you're going to pull out hair that you don't want. And so I kind of splay at my finger like that, right? And that allows me to pull all those loose fibers out. And you kind of get to a point where you know exactly the volume of material that you need for that particular fly. Okay? And I know roughly what I've got there is about right. Okay. Let me just explain something to you. That is this. That okay. This fly, I'm going to show this to you. If you look at it in ways on, you're going to see this. If you look at it from the backside, you're going to see that. You see? So this hair is alongside the hook. It's not spent out left side and right. There's a knack to getting it to set that way. Can you see what I'm trying to show you? Yeah, there you go, like that. So and that's what creates that V shape. It's that flies move through the surface film. And I'll show you how to do it. And that's what it should look like from the front, like that. Okay. All right, so you're going to stack your hair, and I'm going to cut these butts off square. And I find by doing that, it's a lot easier to cut them off, which is what you're going to do once you set these down. So what we need to do is cord this thread. In other words, rotate that bobbin to cord that thread tight. That's important. You don't want flat thread. We're going to catch this in. So roughly speaking, you're about somewhere toward the end of the hook or thereabouts. Hold them butts up and take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you do that, that hair should stay there. I got maximum tension on that thread right now, and it's not moving. It will stay there. It's a fairly compressible hair, incidentally. So, it beds down pretty good with, medium amount thread wraps. And we're just going to bring our thread forward. And we're going
Got the thread forward through the butts, right?
Yep. And we're going to hold our wing down, and we're going to cut these butts off. One thing about deer makes a mess, doesn't it? It's like we got some really good guys that come to our sailbag meetings, tie fly. Mike George is one of them. He's a fantastic deer tire, and no doubt about it. There's another guy, I just can't remember his name. But anyway, I guess one reason why I've never really got too much into tying hair bugs is the damn mess it causes.
Well, you can do it here, Davey, because you're at my house.
Hey, yeah, okay, thank you. All right, so that's good. Now we're going to build up a region in front of this wing. Okay, so we're going to add a little more of this squirrel, and you can change whatever you want to that. I don't really compress hair, it's kind of more like a loose, I rotate that for a long ways across my fingers more than anything else. And then get that there. And then bring that forward. Taper that down. That's good. Now, the next thing, we're going to tie a hackle on here, but I just want to explain this to you. You want to make sure that everything is left side and right side is equal, which it is. I want you to just get your thumb and really compress this down. Push it down. And if you do that, you'll see that it starts to separate. That's the way I explain one to. So you're pushing this down and you're separating that. And ideally, you want separation is equal to the left side to the right side. Just keep pushing that down. And this road here kind of lends itself to do that. See how flat I've got it, and I've got it compressed down that way, because you're going to bring this up through it once you've put the hackle there. So we'll go back to the hackle. Same thing. Pull that down that side, that down that side. Leave that there, because it's so easy to hold that when you wind a hackle. It doesn't matter whether you use the hackle pliers or what, but you're less likely for your hackle pliers to pull off of that than you will with that stem, and you're less likely to break it too. That's another thing. So we're just going to catch the tip of the hackle, and I like these little English hackle pliers. Some of the hackle pliers that they have available out there, I'd throw them away. I mean, they're more likely to bust your hackle than anything else. It's extremely light and they're very easy to manipulate in your hands. That's another thing. So we're just going to get back to our little V. There we go. Catch that in underneath. I always like to, I mess with my thread a lot. You know, I'm always tightening my thread up, cording it tight, or reverse to flatten it. And it very much depends a lot on what I'm doing at the time. In the case of tying something in really tight, I want it to be corded tight. That's the first thing. All right, so we pick the hackle up, and the first turn you make is always the worst. If you yank on that, you pull it out. So it's really a soft turn more than anything else. Take that around, catch it, bring this up, pull that back. Don't attempt the wind until you've got every one of those fibers in a rearward inclination. If you do that, the stem itself will maintain them to stay in that position. And I watch a lot of people trying to get a good hackle on a soft hackle or a spider fly, and they never get it right because they don't control the fibers and the stem of the hackle during the process of that wind. And of course, when they let it go, the fibers goes all over the place. So keep this up. See this, how I've got this hackle right now. Everything's in an umbrella fashion. More in a, I'll let that go, but more in a rearward inclination. And it's if each turn you make, if that is not doing that, I don't care how many more you make in front of it, it is not going to correct the situation. You've got to get it right each turn that you make. And then we're going to continue with that. I'm going to come back up. So this is the position of my hackle at this point of time. Now, I know it's not easy for you to quite see what I do here, but the way I do it is this. I hold the stem of the hackle up. I bring the thread up.
Go.
Oh, hang on, she's going to try and make an adjustment here with the camera. All right, so I hold the stem of the hackle up. I bring my thread up and I take it over to my left. Now I've got that hackle trapped. You follow me? But you must maintain tension. Then I just transfer the bobbin to this hand under tension. Then I just come all the way back round. 2, 3. It won't come undone if you do that right. Okay. All right, we're going to cut off the stem because we don't need that. And that's another thing too. You know, I watch people with their scissors and it go in like this way or this way. The most efficient way to remove material is to bring the blade of the scissor behind it and go that way forward. So you just come back there and you're done, as opposed to going in this way or various other degrees of angle. All right, so that looks good to me. Now, remember what we did. We compressed this down. And you would do it again, just to make sure that we have got left side and right side more or less about identical. Now, what I do to get that wing to form that shape is I pull the wing down and I bring that forward. And see now the wing sets alongside the body of the fly, separated, left side and right side. Okay? We're not splaying it like spent wing, so to speak. I would do that in a slightly different manner, but pretty much we're just going to make sure that we've got it stroked down, left side and right side. And then we've got that thread there to catch in that. Make 2 soft turns here. And pull this under tension. Okay, and it maintains that wing in that position. See that? Once you've got it where you want it, and you've got that tight, and you've got that wing set where you want it to be, then just bring the thread forward, take a few turns in front. That kind of really lock that in pretty good. Let's come back. Cut this off nice and neat by twisting that tight. Get rid of the surplus. Throw it on the floor, whatever you want to do with it. And then we're just going to come back there. I like small heads on flies. I hate to see flies with horrible big heads on them. And that's usually a result of excessive amounts of thread in the first place, but not coming into the right position to secure the materials that you're bringing forward to tie them off. In other words, like you're taking 10 turns of thread instead of you only need 3 and stuff like that. You know, so I like to have relatively small heads on my flies because I think they look an awful lot neater when you do that too. So we're just going to add a little varnish to the thread, and we're going to do the whip finish. And the advantage of that is, of course, you're not going to stick varnish in your eye because you're going to put it in the thread as you bring it forward. And then we've got that done. And so that's how you make that skate and caddis.
Right, so they can see.
So-
the
That
top.
is absolutely as buggy as it can be. I love that.
Yeah. So in your wings are left side and right side, which create that V when you move that fly back to the surface.
Turn it all the
Like
way around.
this one. See, it's easier for you to see it on that fly. See that, Al?
Yep, sure do. Sure
Yeah,
do.
that's how you should get that wing to display itself. on
Any
the finished
questions
fly.
out there for Davy?
Excuse
Yeah.
me. So, Davey, you're using this as a dry fly.
Okay, so there's times, you know, when they skate across the surface, and they can do it at times when they're actually emerging because of whatever reason, wind or whatever. And you see the females often do that too when they, you know, typically caddis flies, when they lay their eggs, they do so by moving upstream. And if you watch them when they oviposit, you know, a lot of times they create that little V wake when they touch the surface. So the answer to your question is, yeah, you can use it as a dead drift dry fly, but typically I would animate that fly. That's how I'd make that work.
Right.
And I also could use that in conjunction with the first fly that we tied. So we would use that fly as the tail fly, which is the fly coming up into the meniscus to emerge. And we'd use that, excuse me, as the more of the adult pattern that's working in off, the surface film. So you're giving yourself 2 options there. And cat and trout being what they are, when it comes to caddis flies, they're going to go after them. And they ain't like slipping a little blue and olive down in the surface film. They move, they chase caddis flies. And you can tie that fly down to a size 16. That's a size 12 I did on there so you can see it a little easier. Okay. So what we're going to do now is the SLF Trans Caddis Emoji. Okay. So I think Al's got that. There you go. So this fly, I think that was 2000 when I did this for fly tire. Yeah, I think so. But it'd been around a long time before that. So objectively, at the time, and this fly, I originally originated for fishing still waters. You know, in the United Kingdom, we fish, of course I don't know, but still water fishing, reservoirs, man-made or natural lakes and locks. It was big time. You know, people believe here that access to fishing rivers is hard to come by. Well, that really is not true at all. You know, most rivers have sections that are leased to angling associations, clubs, and whatever the case may be. And you can buy a regular day ticket, cost 10 or 15 bucks. But if you wanted to go fish on a river test or something like that, well, yeah, you're going to have to book a day, and you're probably going to have pay a little more money on that. But, you know, to be honest about it, it's the truth, you know, what you're really doing. And believe me, I spent a lot of time fishing on those rivers. My friend John Goddard, who's now passed and gone, the guy credited with the Goddard Caddis, incidentally, he had some good setchers on, but for the most part, even those chalk streams are stocked waters. In fact, the river keepers historically were probably the first guys to actually raise fish in hatcheries and stock them into the rivers, so his lordship can catch a trout that averages 2 pounds or something. You don't want to catch no 10 inches, you know, you want to catch good fish, and that's essentially how that come about. And it's still largely the practice even today, to be honest about it. Another thing too is, you know, that in the United Kingdom, rainbow trout are not, shall we say, legally introduced into rivers. So most of those rivers contain true indigenous strains of brown trout, or they may be fish that are raised in hatcheries and reintroduced, but they try to maintain the genetic strains of those fish, because every river in the United Kingdom, north, south, east, west, Ireland, Scotland, you name it, every one of those at one time had true genetic strains of brown trout, which were indigenous to that specific water, and still are in many cases, and particularly in all of the natural lakes. If any of you guys ever fished out in Ireland, you'd find the same. All right, so this goes back, as I said, way back early 90s, and was featured in Fly Tire, and it amounted to this. I'm going to show you a technique that you're probably going to amaze you some. So typically I used seal fur, and there really is natural material that compares with seal fur, and is used a lot in traditional flies there. And the reason being, it has a natural translucency to it. And the only material that's really close to that is actually polar bear, so to speak. But it can be dyed any color. So a lot of traditional flies, be they dry flies or traditional wet flies, used seal fur because of the value of or its intrinsic value, the coloration and translucency. Unfortunately, seal fur is not legal in America because the regulations ban the use of any saltwater mammal, which of course means seal fur because it comes from a mammal. Anyway, so what we're going to do is this. So to the best of my knowledge, when I did this fly, I figured things out in different ways, and I used to tie a lot of salmon flies for a shop in London. And the thing that galled me more than anything else was building big, bulky silver bodies, because that's not easy to do. So I had to figure out a means where I could do things a little easier. And the way I did that was to use this technique of what you guys know as splitting thread. And this is what I did. So I know there's some gadgets out there that's supposed to help you split the thread a little easier, but let me get that. Okay. I tried some of that stuff, and my view about it is this. If you're going to use really fine thread, it makes no difference. On the other hand, the manner in which you can make material present itself will differ based on what you do. Now, let me show you something. You see this thread? If I'm really careful, I know I can rotate this bobbin back, right? And untwist that, and I can split that thread way back here. I mean, I'm about 12 inches away from this hook, and that thread is split all the way for that length. Which, when I was messing with this stuff years ago, I figured something out in a hurry. I didn't use no gadgets to spin the material in the thread. And hopefully I can demonstrate this to you because it'll amaze you. So what I did, I put the material in, which would have been silver, and I'm going to bring this bobbin back. I'm going to hold it up here so you can see what I'm going to do. Now, I'm going to get my thumb and I'm going to push it on there and see what happens. I rotated all that dubbing in that thread just by compression of my thumb. Can you see that? See, back and forth.
I saw that, and Gretchen are both sitting here with our mouths hanging open. Beautiful.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, okay. So what I did, Al, to avoid that's how I would build these bodies with the silver, because I could put the entire body in there. You know, if it started off with yellow and went to red and orange, I could set the whole damn body of the fly of the silver in there and rotate that and do what I just showed you. Another thing too is see if I rotate the bobbin, see what it does? It rotates the material. See that? So you just go like that.
Pulling it back and forth.
Right? All right, so the object for this fly is that we want a very flyaway effect body because we want to build a lot of translucence into the body of the fly. And if you use by normal means the regular twist onto the thread to do that, and even if you kind of hack it out, you know, with some means or other, you still won't get that kind of effect. So what we have is a really big flyaway effect to that, which is very important because what we're going to do is we're going to build a casing over the top of that, either with Swiss door or medallion. But I know you guys probably can't get that medallion, so I'll show you with Swiss draw. So essentially all we're going to do is we're going to separate it, and this is tan color incidentally, like that. And you want about twice the width of what this fold over is going to be to the body of the fly, because you need to encapsulate this body to enable it to do what it needs to do when it's wet. And it really looks like a pupa that's so translucent when it's wet in the water. And so we're just going to cut about 3/8 of an inch like that. This vise, incidentally, Don there at Regal, he sent this to me a few weeks ago. And he said, what do you think of this vise? I really like that. You know, it's got this joy. And then my other friend, the fly smith, he sent me this pair of scissors. I know us guys that are really into time, we're real fussy about our scissors because to me, it's such an important thing in efficiency and time. A really good pair of scissors, you know, and that. So, okay, so we got that. We're going to fold this over in half carefully, like that. So the easiest way to explain that one to you is that when we've got that set on the top of the hook, we want it to encapsulate the left side and the right side of the body of the fly. So I'm just going to moisten that a little because it's a little easier to work with if we do that. Okay, so we've got that. Now, hold that above the hook, and you can always leave it longer than the bend of the hook because you're going to trim it back anyway, so don't leave yourself too short. So we're just going to hold that across the top like that. Pinch it. Just take 2 turns to make sure that you've got that there, that side, and you've got it looking like that on the far side. Okay. All right, we've got that. Now what you're going to do is you're going to pick this up and you're going to bring that back. Okay. And like I said, it's not technically difficult fly to tie, but it takes just a little bit to do it. That's all, you know. And so we want a fairly long fibered hackle, not because really what we want to do is we're kind of representing the legs of the fly or the pupa as they're emerging. Same thing. Pull that back. Pull that back. And we've got that, right? Put that back. Here's a little V. Like I said, I caught my thread very tight. 1, 2, 3. Usually 3 turns is more than enough to secure a hackle of that kind. I don't know. For some reason, I don't know. I watch a lot of guys tying flies, and yank, 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 and they wind about 10 turns of thread. Well, the first one's going to put it where you want it to be. The second one's going to add security to it, and the third one's really going to keep it there, and at the most, the fourth. Why build a massive unnecessary wrap of threads when you don't really need it? Okay, so once again, remember the little tip. Keep that on there. It's so useful if you do that, not just for partridge shackles, but a lot of others too. And just draw those fibers rearward. Bring this back. I don't need too much of a hairy hackle, but I need enough. Let's put it like that. Let me bring that back. And once again, the way I secure it, I hold the hackle up, I take the thread up, and I do this in one motion. I kind of very quickly just turn my bobbin around like that. So boom, boom in one go. All right. And just secure that down. Cut that off. All right, that's good. So we've got that there. Because this is going to actually come over the top when we did with that. Very good. All right. So we're going to put a little thorax in there. You can use whatever material you want. It's your choice, color-wise. Like I said at the beginning of the program, you can alternate the colorations on these flies depending on what you want to do. Most times, when Caddis is concerned, when you're going to use something that's more natural hairs, shades, or olives, or something like that. Although that said, I've actually did them in bright orange, and you'd be surprised how that can work at times. Also, cream. That's another one. So bring this back. Don't need a huge head, but you need a little bit there. Thing about it, is, if I tie these flies at home, I'd tie them real fast. And so a lot of times, as you probably know, Al, when you got to slow things down to demonstrate, you actually got to think about what you're doing, because under normal circumstances, you don't really have to think about what you're doing. You just, oh yeah, I just crank out another one, so to speak. All right. Okay, we've got that. Now we're going to bring this over. Now make sure you've got this moistened when you do that. That's the important thing. Make sure your hackle fibers are back there, because really all they're doing is representing the legs of the caddis fly during the stages of emergence. Okay, so we make a little small neat head there. Cut that off. Now, once again, if you want to add some antenna, well, you're just going to go back to your mallard.
Turn the camera.
Take 2 or 3 strands. I give you a tip. When you do this, take 3 or 4 strands. And reason being, it's the safety. If you bust one off, you've got another one there to work with. Okay, and so the way I get the curl in them, I hold the feather like that. I just run my fingernail through them. And see, I get the ram's horns. You tie them so the little ram's horns are uppermost. Oh, missed that one. Make sure you've got them in line with a hook like that. Okay. Now I'm going to cut that off. Now we're going to pick this up, this piece that we left at the back, cut that forward. Oh, sorry, pick this up, and we're going to just cut that down, kind of like at an angle. That's the way to explain it to you. Yeah. So what you've done, you've kind of like built a sheath around the underbody of the fly. That's what you've done. And when that gets wet, I can guarantee you, if you tie this fly at home and you put that in a glass of water, you will not believe how translucent the effect is of the fly tied by this means. All right, so we've got our antennae. We're going to split those, one to the left and one to the right. Come here, little devil. One to the right. And put up a nice neat head. For me, you know, a lot of the, if that's what I explained to you, as far as fly construction is concerned, it's not just a question of what I call a vice fly. In other words, you know, you take 5 materials and put them on the table in front of me, and I could tie Lord knows how many combinations of different flies with those 5 materials. Does that make sense? No, not really. As far as I'm concerned, the construction of a fly has to have some value to it, which is, as we discussed earlier on, what does it look like to the fish and how efficient it is at catching them? That's the thing that matters to me more than anything else. And so
Davey, I
that's
can see why that ended up on the cover of Fly Tire magazine. That is awesome.
thank you. Yeah. So it's a hell of a fish catcher. I guarantee you it is. Um, yeah, you remember Dick Stewart?
Very well.
Yeah. He, we had him over there into the UK, you know. We used to have the partridge fly tying days when Alan owned the company still, and we would invite, you know, American celebrities in the fly fishing business, particularly fly tyers. You know, we had a lot of the good guys over there. You know, Wayne Llewellyn come over, and John came over, and oh, a lot of unfortunately the guys that you and I both know are no longer with us. You know, Warren Duncan, you remember him?
Sure do.
Yeah, I never met a person today that could tie flies, the Hemming flies that he could, the way he did. Yeah, he was something else. So, all right, so we can just finish that off. And so there you go. That's the Trans SLF Caddis mode. And this incidentally is one of the original SLFs from my factory back in Wales. It's still, you know, that's about, oh, I started making this back in the 80s. So I actually did this to make pretty much as close as I could with different synthetic materials. It's not just one material to duplicate seal, and because baby seal fur, there's nothing quite like it, you know, and it has 3 basic components. It has the guard hair, which is about half an inch long, and it has 2 kinds of underfur. And so what I actually did when I developed this product was to source synthetics that had those characteristics. And there's 3 different fibers that are blended here to make what I considered to be the closest representation of seal fur with that degree of translucency to it, which is another reason why Dave had me produce all the Dave Whitlock dubbing blends, of which there was 24, because he liked the inclusion of a bit more effect in the bodies of the materials for the flies that he had developed. So, which is what we did, you know. So, you know, even whatever they were, you know, the red fox squirrel dubbings, be it the thorax or whatever else, they had just a little more effect to them. And I think that does make a difference, because most natural materials, for example, you take hare's fur, it pretty much it goes pretty dark when it's wet and it's in the water. It doesn't really have a lot of, other than the silhouette shaped form of the nymph, typically, whatever you want, you know, a hare's a nymph. And same with pheasant tail too. It's the silhouette shaped form that it is, which is characteristic of bugs that the trout see. But I've always felt that if you can build some value to a fly that is a little more than that, and we do that a lot with our artificial flies, of course, we build factors into that are more trigger responsive. I guess that's the way to explain it one too. So anyway, I hope you guys learn a little bit from what I do, and I hope you tie them flies, because you'll catch a bunch of fish with them if you do.
Love it. Davy. We are
Yeah.
just absolutely delighted you were able to join us. And Susan, thank you so much for being the technical guru in the background there.
Picked up some tricks, Davy. Thanks.
Yeah, we
Oh,
got
yeah.
one minute. I had to pick Gretchen up off of the floor. She said, "Oh no, that is so doggone cool." I'm joking when I say I had to pick her up off the floor, but it was pretty cool.
That was cool.
Oh, with the dubbing technique.
That was out the long dubbing loop and pulled it up. And I said,
Oh,
"Oh Jesus Christ, that was so cool!" Thank you. This is a part of the program where we go to sharing on BTs, and tonight's going to be abbreviated sharing, and we are going to see what Evelyn did with Davy's flies. And there you are, Evelyn. And that's your first one. Hey, good job. Really good job.
Right there, that's the first
Yeah.
one. There's the second one,
Another good one. Thank you so much.
and here's the third one.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I like that
I
one.
love that one. Yeah.
Super.
Really, really looks great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, that's it for this week, folks. For now, it's a wrap until next time. Thanks so much for joining us.